They didn't just give my room away. They erased me. My father pointed to the freshly painted walls, now a sterile gray, and said, "This is a gentleman's lounge for your brother now, Arya. It's for people who contribute." My trophies were in a wet box in the basement, my posters were in the trash, and my 17 years of memories were painted over in an afternoon. The worst part wasn't the room. It was the look on their faces. My mother, my father, my brother, Lachlan, as they laughed at my shock. It was the casual cruelty of it all. Have you ever been made to feel like a ghost in your own home? Like your entire history was just a temporary placeholder for someone they deemed more important? They thought they were kicking out a failure. They had no idea they were creating their new landlord. The drive over had been tense enough. I hated these mandatory Sunday dinners. They weren't about family, they were about performance. The air in my parents' oversized house on Hawthorne Street was always thick with the scent of potpourri and judgment. Today, the judgment was cranked up to an 11. My brother Lachlan, the golden child, had just been made a junior vice president at some faceless finance firm. To hear my parents talk about it, you'd think he'd single-handedly cured a disease. Lachlan's new office has a view of the entire city, my mother Eleanor said, passing the mashed potatoes with a flourish. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, flickered over me. Imagine that, Arya, a real corner office. Not just a corner in a coffee shop. I stirred my food, my fork scraping against the china plate. My graphic design work is going fine, Mom. I have clients. Clients, dear. Or hobbies. She chirped, her smile never reaching her eyes. My father, Richard, cleared his throat, a sound that commanded attention. He was a man who wore his suits like armor, his posture always rigid, as if he were constantly posing for a portrait of success. Eleanor, be nice. Arya is finding her way. The condescension in his voice was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that smothered any hope of a real conversation. Lachlan just smirked into his wineglass. He loved this. He thrived on being the benchmark against which I was always measured, and found wanting. My Uncle Jean, my mother's brother, sat silently at the end of the table, his shoulders slumped. He'd lost his own business a few years back, and my father had bailed him out, a fact Richard never let anyone forget. Now Jean was a ghost at these dinners, a living reminder of what happened to those who failed in the Thorne family's eyes. He wouldn't meet my gaze, he just stared at his plate, a compromised coward caught in a gilded cage. After the main course, my father patted his lips with a napkin. "Arya, be a dear and run upstairs to your old room. There's a photo album on the top shelf of the closet. The blue one. Your mother wants to show Lachlan's fiancé some baby pictures." My old room. I hadn't stayed there in over a year, ever since I'd finally scraped together enough for a deposit on my own tiny apartment. But they always kept it for me, a time capsule of my childhood. The lavender walls, the corkboard covered in photos, the window seat, where I'd read for hours. It was the one piece of this house that still felt like mine. I nodded, grateful for the escape, and headed up the carpeted stairs. When I pushed the door open, the air was knocked from my lungs. It was gone. All of it. The lavender was gone, painted over with a soulless, corporate gray. My single bed, my desk, my bookshelf, all vanished. In their place stood a monstrous black leather couch, a glass coffee table, and against the far wall, a fully stocked wet bar. The air smelled of wood polish and Lachlan's cologne. A rack on the wall held expensive-looking bottles of whiskey and a humidor for cigars. It looked like a cheap imitation of a CEO's office from a bad movie. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stumbled back into the hallway, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. I walked back down the stairs slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. The laughter from the dining room died down as I entered. They all looked at me, their faces expectant. What happened to my room?" My voice was a small, tight knot in my throat. Lachlan laughed first, a short barking sound. Oh, that. Yeah. I needed a place to entertain clients. For work. He said the word work like it was a concept I couldn't possibly understand. My mother waved a dismissive hand. Hey, Raya? Honestly, it's a gentleman's lounge now. Much more practical. What did you need it for? Anyway, you're barely making ent on that little apartment of yours. It's not like you were using it. The words were sharp, but it was my father's expression that shattered me. He stood up, puffing out his chest, his face a mask of disappointment and authority. Arya, he said, his voice low and firm, this house is for contributors. It is an asset, and the people in it must also be assets. Your brother is building a future, entertaining important people. This is a space for men who contribute to the family's legacy. He gestured vaguely around the opulent dining room. This is for winners, not for people living out a little hobby, waiting for a handout. He called me a failure, a useless, temporary guest in the home where I took my first steps. The room spun. The faces of my mother and brother were smug, triumphant. They had won. They had finally, officially, downgraded me from daughter to burden. My things? I whispered. My books? My trophies? Lachlan shrugged. Probably in the basement. Dad's orders. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked, stiff-legged, to the basement door. The air that hit me was damp and musty, the smell of mildew and forgotten things. And there, in the corner, next to a pile of deflated Christmas decorations and old paint cans, were 3 cardboard boxes. They were unsealed, and the dampness had already seeped into the cardboard, making them soft and weak. I reached in and pulled out a soccer trophy from when I was 10. It was wet to the touch. Beneath it, my high school diaries, their pages swollen and warped, my yearbooks, my posters, a box of cherished photos, my entire history, my 17 years of memories, treated like garbage. They hadn't just renovated a room. They had excavated my life and dumped the remains in the dark. I looked at the soggy box in my hands. I felt nothing and everything, all at once. A cold, hard clarity settled over me. I walked back up the stairs, past the dining room, where their laughter had started up again, and straight out the front door. I didn't slam it. I closed it softly behind me, the click of the latch sounding like the final word in a conversation I never wanted to have again. As I walked down the driveway, the sound of their party echoed behind me. That night, I didn't just feel homeless. I felt completely and utterly erased. The first week was a blur of shame and shock. I crashed on my friend Sarah's couch, surrounded by her cheerful, cluttered life, which only made my own emptiness feel more profound. The humiliation was a physical thing, a constant weight in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my father's words echoing in my ears. This house is for contributors, for assets. He'd made me feel like a liability, a line item in the red on his family's balance sheet. The worst part was, I started to believe him. My freelance graphic design work, which had always been a source of pride, suddenly felt like the little hobby he'd called it. My confidence was shot. Emails to potential clients went unanswered. My creativity, once my only real currency, vanished. The well was dry. Within 2 weeks I was broke. Truly broke. The kind of broke where you count loose change to see if you can afford a loaf of bread. I had no choice. I swallowed the bitter pill of my pride and took the first job I could get, a barista at a generic coffee chain downtown. The uniform was an ugly brown polo shirt that smelled faintly of stale coffee, no matter how many times I washed it. The work was mind-numbing. Steam milk, pull shot, call out a name, repeat every time someone in a sharp suit ordered a complicated latte without making eye contact. I saw my father's face. Every time a group of young professionals laughed together, I heard my brother's mocking tone. I was the failure they always said I was, serving coffee to the kind of people they respected. I spent my nights back at Sarah's, trying to be invisible, waiting for her to go to bed, so I could finally unpack the soggy boxes I'd rescued from my parents' basement. It was a pathetic ritual. I'd lay my damp childhood treasures out on newspaper on the floor, trying to dry them, trying to salvage the pieces of the girl they had thrown away. One night, my hand brushed against something heavy and solid at the bottom of the last box. It was a book, wrapped in oilcloth. It was thick and bound in dark, worn leather. I didn't recognize it. I carefully unwrapped it. The cover was blank, but when I opened it, I saw elegant, old-fashioned handwriting, the journal of Arthur Gable, my grandfather. My mother's father. I barely remembered him. He'd passed away when I was very young. My mother always spoke of him with a strange mix of affection and dismissal, calling him a simple man, a small-time builder. But this was no simple man's diary. Inside were not just his thoughts, but meticulously detailed notes, pages and pages on property acquisition, on navigating city zoning laws, on the art of negotiation. And then I saw them, folded carefully in the back, a series of hand-drawn blueprints, my breath caught in my throat. They were blueprints of the houses on Hawthorne Street, my parents' street, the neighborhood he had helped build from the ground up. I stayed up all night, reading. My grandfather wrote about property in a way I had never heard before. For my father, a house was a status symbol, a billboard to advertise his success. For my grandfather, it was something more fundamental. One entry, underlined twice, jumped out at me. "You don't own a house," it read. "You own a piece of the future. You own the foundation upon which lives are built. It's not about the wood and nails. It's about the security, the stability, the ground beneath a family's feet." A spark ignited in the hollow space inside me. It was small, but it was warm. The next day, on my break from the coffee shop, I didn't scroll through social media. I went to the public library. I used their computers to look up every term from my grandfather's journal. I took out books on real estate law, urban development, and basic finance. I started taking free online courses on my phone during the bus ride to work. At night, instead of mourning my past, I started planning a future. I created a spreadsheet on Sarah's old laptop, listing every single property on Hawthorne Street. I analyzed their property tax records, their last sale dates, their estimated market values, cross-referencing everything with the insights from my grandfather's notes. For the first time since that horrible Sunday dinner, the fog in my head began to clear. The humiliation didn't disappear, but it changed. It morphed from a weight that was crushing me into a fuel that was propelling me forward. They thought I was a nobody, a useless, disposable failure. I was going to build an empire out of the very dirt they so proudly stood on. Knowledge is one thing, but in the world of real estate, it's useless without capital. My plan was meticulous, my numbers were solid, but my bank account was a joke. I was a barista with a 5-figure student loan debt and a dream. I put on my one good blazer, printed out my business plan, and made the rounds to every bank in the city. The reaction was always the same. A polite, condescending smile from a loan officer, who looked like a younger version of my brother, followed by a swift, firm rejection. They didn't just say no, they looked at me with a pity that was almost worse than my family's contempt. "Miss Thorne," one of them said, barely glancing at my proposal, "perhaps you should consider a small business loan for a cafe. Something more in line with your experience." I walked out of that bank feeling the familiar sting of being underestimated, of being put in a box. Defeated but not yet broken, I went back to my grandfather's journal, searching for another way. Tucked into a side pocket was a faded, folded note. On it was a name, Marcus Vance. Beside the name, my grandfather had written, "A stubborn old goat, but the sharpest man I ever knew, owns the ugliest duplex in the city, but it's a diamond in the rough." A quick search online confirmed it. Marcus Vance was a semi-mythical figure in the local real estate scene. He'd built a small empire in the 90s, only to lose almost everything in the 2008 crash. Rumor was, He now lived as a recluse in a dilapidated house on the outskirts of town, bitter and angry at the world. He was my last hope. I found his address and drove Sarah's beat-up car to a neighborhood that looked like it had been forgotten by time. The house was even worse than the rumors suggested. The paint was peeling, the porch was sagging, and the lawn was a jungle of weeds. I took a deep breath, marched up the crumbling steps, and knocked on the door. After a long moment, it creaked open a few inches. A pair of sharp, suspicious eyes peered out from the darkness within. "Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying," a gruff voice rasped. "Mr. Vance?" I began. "My name is Arya Thorne. I'm not selling anything." "Then you're wasting my time." He started to close the door. Desperation fueled me. "Wait," I shouted, my voice trembling slightly. "I have a business plan. I don't want your money. I just want you to look at it." "Get off my property," he growled. And the door began to close. In a last-ditch effort, I did the only thing I could think of. I shoved my neatly printed proposal toward the shrinking gap, letting it fall onto the floor inside. "It's about the duplex on Elm Street," I yelled at the closed door. "The one everyone says is worthless." I waited, my heart pounding. For a full minute there was only silence. I was about to turn and walk away, defeated, when I heard the bolt slide back. The door opened again, wider this time. Marcus Vance stood there, a tall, gaunt man with a wild mane of gray hair and a scowl etched onto his face. He was holding my business plan. He looked from the papers to my face. His eyes narrowed. "You've got 5 minutes," he grunted, stepping aside to let me in. The inside of the house was a disaster zone. Old newspapers were stacked everywhere, dishes were piled in the sink, and a thick layer of dust covered every surface. But as he led me down a hallway, I saw a single closed door. He opened it, and it was like stepping into another world. The office was immaculate. The desk was clear, the books were neatly organized, and one entire wall was covered in detailed maps and property charts. This was where he lived. The rest of the house was just a fortress to keep the world out. He sat down and read my proposal, his face unreadable. I stood there, shifting my weight, feeling like a schoolgirl in the principal's office. Finally, he looked up. "It's a battle plan," he said, his voice less hostile now. "But it's missing one thing: experience, the kind that kicks you in the teeth." He leaned back in his chair. "You know why I lost everything? I trusted the wrong person. My son-in-law. A charismatic, slick-talking finance guy who promised me the world." He looked at me, and his gaze was piercing. "He reminded me of your brother." My jaw must have dropped. "How did you?" "I made one call after you left your proposal," he said. "To a friend at the city records office. Thorne." I remembered the name. "Your father, Richard, bought his big fancy house with a loan he couldn't afford. Your brother, Lachlan, is just another suit who thinks he's a genius because he was born on third base. And you're the one they threw away." He saw the shock and hurt on my face. "The world is full of Lachlan's kids. They're charming, they're confident, and they will burn your life's work to the ground to warm their hands. I see a fire in you, the same one I had, but I also see a vulnerability that they will exploit." He tapped my business plan. "So here's the deal. I'll co-sign the loan for that duplex. I'll teach you everything my grandfather taught me, and everything the world taught me the hard way. But you do it my way. No shortcuts, no easy answers. You will learn this business from the studs up, and when you start turning a real profit, when you form your company, I get 15%. This isn't charity, kid. This is my redemption. I'm not going to let another good builder get torn down by the suits." I looked at this wounded, angry man, and I didn't see a recluse. I saw an ally. I saw my one and only chance. "I agree," I said, my voice clear and steady for the first time in weeks. "When do we start?" The duplex on Elm Street was not a diamond in the rough. It was a complete nightmare. From the outside, it looked neglected. On the inside, It was a war zone. The previous tenants had been squatters, and they had treated the place with absolute contempt. The plumbing was a corroded mess, the ancient knob and tube wiring was a legitimate fire hazard, and a very territorial family of raccoons had taken up residence in the attic. The smell was a combination of mildew, animal waste, and despair. My entire life savings, a pathetic sum I'd scraped together from my coffee shop job, and the last of my freelance paychecks, disappeared in the first week just on materials to gut the place. Marcus was a brutal teacher. My business plan had naively budgeted for contractors for the major work. He took one look at my numbers and laughed. "You can't afford them," he said flatly. "So you're going to become them." He didn't yell. He didn't lecture. He just expected me to figure it out. He'd show up once a day, point at a crumbling wall and say, "That's not straight. Fix it." Then he'd leave. My life became a grueling cycle of exhaustion. I'd work the opening shift at the coffee shop from 5 a.m. to 1 p.m., my body aching from the day before. Then I'd take the bus to the duplex and work until I couldn't see straight. My weekends were gone, swallowed by a cloud of drywall dust and the frustration of my own incompetence. I spent hours on YouTube, my phone propped up on a bucket, watching tutorials on how to patch drywall, how to sweat a copper pipe, how to lay vinyl tile. My hands, once skilled with a stylus for graphic design, were now calloused, cut, and permanently stained with paint. I cried more times than I could count. I'd sit on the floor of a half-finished bathroom, covered in filth, my muscles screaming in protest, and just weep from sheer frustration and loneliness. There was nothing glamorous about this. This was the tangible struggle, the ugly reality behind the fantasy of flipping a house. This was sweat and dirt and debt. The moment I almost broke came on a rainy Tuesday. I had just finished installing the new kitchen cabinets and flooring, a small victory that had taken me 2 exhausting weeks. I was standing back, admiring my work, feeling a flicker of pride for the first time. Then I heard a strange groaning sound from the wall, followed by a loud pop. A jet of rusty water erupted from behind the new sink, flooding my brand new floor. A main supply line had burst. I stared in horror as water poured out, warping the vinyl tiles I had so painstakingly laid. The water damage was catastrophic. The cost to hire a real plumber and replace the ruined flooring would be thousands of dollars. Thousands of dollars I absolutely did not have. That was it. I was done. I sat on the wet floor, the dirty water soaking into my jeans, and gave up. My family was right. I was a failure. I was an artist trying to play a builder's game, and I had lost. I called Marcus, my voice thick with tears, and told him I was finished, that I was going to have to declare bankruptcy. He was there in 20 minutes. He didn't say a word about the flood. He just looked at the mess, then looked at me sitting there defeated. He sat down on an overturned bucket across from me. He didn't offer me money. He didn't offer a solution. He just asked one question, his voice quiet but intense. "How bad do you want it, Arya?" His question cut through my self-pity. How bad did I want it? Did I want it enough to endure this? Did I want to prove my father wrong more than I wanted to be comfortable? Did I want to build something real more than I feared failing? I thought about my room, painted over in sterile gray. I thought about my trophies in a wet box. I thought about their laughter. And I knew the answer. The next day, I did the hardest thing I'd had to do yet. I took the bus to a used car dealership and sold my only valuable possession, my small, reliable car. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was my freedom. I watched the dealer hand me a check, and it felt like I was selling a part of myself. I used every penny of that money to pay an emergency plumber and buy new flooring. The next morning, I stood at the bus stop at 4:30 a.m., the cold morning air biting at my skin, waiting to go to my coffee shop job before heading to the duplex. The humiliation of it was sharp, but as the bus pulled up, I felt something else too, a grim, quiet satisfaction. I had sacrificed for this. I had paid the price. No one could ever say this wasn't earned. After months of brutal, back-breaking labor, the duplex was finally finished. The transformation was staggering. The raccoon-infested wreck was now two clean, bright, beautiful apartments. The pride I felt was deeper and more real than any freelance design award I had ever won. I had built this with my own two hands. But now came the next, equally daunting challenge: finding tenants. I put an ad online, and the applications started trickling in. The first applicant seemed like a gift from heaven. He was a young professional, a junior analyst at a big investment firm, with a high salary and a perfect credit score. He was charming, well-dressed, and reeked of expensive cologne and entitlement. During the viewing, he barely looked at the apartment, spending most of the time on his phone. "Looks fine," he said, dismissively. "I'll take it. In fact, I'll pay 6 months' rent up front. In cash. Just makes things easier, right?" He gave me a slick smile that sent a shiver down my spine. It was the same smile I had seen on my brother's face 1,000 times. I told him I'd get back to him. Marcus, when I told him about the offer, was practical. "Take the money," he advised, his voice pragmatic over the phone. "It's the smart business move. Guaranteed income, minimal risk. It gets you liquid for the next project." I knew he was right, from a purely financial standpoint, but something felt wrong. I checked the applicant's references. The previous landlord was vague, saying only that he paid on time. It was an oddly neutral review for such a supposedly perfect tenant. The next day, my second applicant came for a viewing. She was a single mother named Maria, with two young children who clung to her hands. Her job as a nurse's aide was stable, but her income was significantly lower than the finance bros. She was late for the appointment, apologizing profusely because her daughter's school had called. Unlike the first applicant, Maria looked at everything. She ran her hand over the new kitchen countertops. She checked the water pressure in the shower. She looked in the closets. She was looking for a home, not just a place to live. She was honest with me. "My last landlord sold the building, and we had to move out quickly," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "My credit isn't perfect. I had some memo bills a few years ago, but I have never ever missed a rent payment. I just need a safe place for my kids." I looked at her, at the hope and anxiety warring in her eyes, and I saw myself. I saw a person who was being judged by the numbers on a piece of paper, a person who just needed someone to take a chance on them. I thought about my father's words ringing in my ears, the cruel philosophy he lived by. "This house is for contributors, for assets." He saw people as numbers on a ledger. Was I going to become him? Was that the price of success in this business? I knew Marcus was testing me. He had given me the smart advice, but he was waiting to see what I would actually do. He was waiting to see if I had learned the lesson he'd lost his empire failing to understand. The choice was clear. It wasn't even a choice, really. The next day, I called the finance bro and politely told him the apartment was no longer available. He was incredulous, then angry, but I didn't care. Then I called Maria. "The apartment is yours," I said. I could hear the gasp of relief on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of her starting to cry softly. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means to us." To make things easier, I worked with her to set up a payment schedule that aligned perfectly with her bi-weekly paychecks from the hospital, so she would never have to worry about the rent being due before she got paid. When I told Marcus what I had done, he was silent for a long moment. I held my breath, waiting for him to tell me I was a sentimental fool who had just made a terrible business decision. But when he finally spoke, his voice was laced with a gruff sort of pride. "Good," he said simply. "Houses are assets. Homes are about people. Never forget the difference." It was the first time he had ever praised me. I had turned down a pile of cash. I had taken the harder, riskier path. But in doing so, I had proven to myself exactly what kind of person and what kind of owner I was determined to be. The duplex was just the beginning. I followed the Marcus Vance playbook to the letter. We reinvested every penny of profit from the first property into a second, then a third. Within 2 years, I had moved from duplexes to a small 6-unit apartment building in a neighboring town. I was still living a simple life. I drove a beat-up 10-year-old sedan I'd bought with cash, and my apartment was modest. On the surface, I was still just Aria Thorne, the barista, but in the shadows I had formed a limited liability company, an LLC, to protect myself and to keep my activities anonymous. I called it Willow Creek Holdings, a deliberately generic name that wouldn't draw any attention. My family had no ideas. As far as they were concerned, I had faded into the obscurity they always felt I deserved. We hadn't spoken since the day I left their house, a silence I was grateful for. My next target was a big one. It was a small, neglected strip mall on the outer edge of my old neighborhood. It was an eyesore, with half the storefronts vacant and the parking lot riddled with potholes. But the location was strategic. It was the commercial anchor for that part of town, and I knew from my grandfather's notes that its potential was huge. Acquiring it would be a game-changer for Willow Creek Holdings, a major leap from residential to commercial property. After weeks of negotiation, I put in an offer. To my immense relief, the aging owner, who was tired of the hassle, accepted it. The deal was moving forward, and I was on the verge of my biggest success yet. But somehow, the news got out. My mother had a cousin, a notorious gossip, who worked at the title agency, handling the sale. She didn't know it was me, of course. She just heard that a small, no-name company called Willow Creek Holdings was buying the old Henderson Mall. And as she always did, she immediately called my mother to share the juicy piece of local news. My mother, in turn, mentioned it to Lachlan. For my brother, this was an opportunity he couldn't resist. He saw a chance to swoop in, play the hero, and impress our father. He probably imagined himself buying the property out from under this mysterious little company, proving his business acumen. He started digging, using the connections at his finance firm. It didn't take him long to find out which bank was financing my deal. And then he did what people like him always do. He used his power not to build something, but to tear something down. He called a senior loan officer at the bank, a man he knew from a few schmoozy networking events. He didn't have to say much. He just planted the seeds of doubt. He casually mentioned hearing rumors about this Willow Creek Holdings. He wondered aloud if the bank had done its due diligence on this shady-sounding shell corporation. He implied, without ever saying it outright, that it could be a front for something illegal, something the bank wouldn't want its name attached to. It worked perfectly. The bank panicked. The loan officer, terrified of being associated with a risky deal, immediately put my loan on hold, pending a full review. The funding was frozen. My deal, which had been just days from closing, was about to collapse entirely. I got the call from my own stunned banker, who couldn't give me a straight answer about what had happened. I was sitting in my small apartment staring at the wall in numb disbelief when my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew instantly who it was from. The message read, "Heard some little strip mall deal is going south. Tough break, guess some people just aren't cut out for the big leagues. Better stick to selling coffee, sis. It's safer." A cold dread washed over me. It was him. It was Lachlan. This wasn't a random setback. This was a targeted attack. My own brother had deliberately, maliciously sabotaged me. He wasn't just content with me being a failure. He was actively working to ensure I remained one. The attack was real, it was personal, and it was about to destroy everything I had spent the last 2 years fighting for. I was terrified. The carefully constructed wall of confidence I had built around myself crumbled in an instant. This was different from my father's verbal insults, or my mother's passive aggression. This was a direct, calculated assault on my livelihood. Lachlan had used his privilege and connections as a weapon, and he had aimed it right at my heart. I called Marcus, my voice shaking as I read him Lachlan's text. I expected Marcus to be pragmatic, to tell me it was a setback we could overcome. Instead, there was a long, cold silence on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, dangerous growl I had never heard before. The rich kid's first move is always to call his daddy's friends, he snarled. It's the only move they have. Arrogant, lazy, and pathetic. He thinks he's a shark, but he's just a spoiled brat, playing in the deep end. We're not going to play his game. We're going to play a different game. Marcus made one phone call. It wasn't to a loan officer or a bank manager. It was to a man named Arthur Kensington, an old, powerful friend who sat on the main board of directors for the entire banking conglomerate. Marcus didn't shout or threaten. He calmly, precisely laid out the facts. He described Willow Creek Holdings' perfect track record. He detailed the strip mall deal and its profitability. And then he explained how a junior VP named Lachlan Thorne, in a clear act of personal animosity and likely illegal tortious interference, had contacted a subordinate at the bank to scuttle the deal based on baseless rumors. He forwarded Lachlan's text message to Mr. Kensington. The effect was instantaneous. The tables didn't just turn, they were flipped over and set on fire. An internal investigation was launched immediately. The senior loan officer who had buckled under Lachlan's pressure was suddenly fighting for his job, and Lachlan himself was now on the receiving end of some very pointed questions from his firm's compliance department. Less than 24 hours later, I received a call from a regional vice president of the bank. He was profusely apologetic. My loan, he assured me, was not only approved, but was being fast-tracked. He offered me a lower interest rate as a token of the bank's sincere regret for the misunderstanding. I hung up the phone, my fear replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I had won this battle, but it was a victory that clarified the war. My family would never stop. Their deep-seated insecurity meant they would always see my success, no matter how small or secret, as a direct threat to their own fragile sense of superiority. The only way to ever be truly safe, the only way to be free from their sabotage, was to become untouchable. That was the moment my mission crystallized. It was no longer just about proving them wrong or achieving financial independence. It was about fulfilling the promise I had made to myself that first night, standing in their driveway. It was about power, not the loud, flashy power my father and brother craved, but the quiet, absolute power that comes from ownership. I went back to my apartment and unrolled the blueprints from my grandfather's journal. I spread them out on my floor, the old, brittle paper crackling under my hands. I looked at the map of Hawthorne Street, the place where my humiliation had been born. I wasn't just going to succeed despite them. I was going to succeed right under their noses. I was going to buy the entire block. I started methodically, quietly. My first target was a house 2 doors down from my parents', owned by an elderly couple looking to downsize and move to a warmer climate. Through my LLC, Willow Creek Holdings, I made them a generous, all-cash offer that was well above market value. They accepted immediately. The next target was a rental property, owned by an out-of-state investor who was happy to offload it. One by one, I began approaching the homeowners on Hawthorne Street. My strategy was always the same: be fair, be generous, and be discreet. For the older residents, like Mrs. Gable, a sharp-witted widow who had lived on the block for 50 years, I included a special clause in the sales contract, a lifetime lease agreement. They could sell me their house, but continue living in it for the rest of their lives, paying a fixed, nominal rent that would never increase. They were selling a burdensome asset, but keeping their home. They were happy to sell to my quiet, anonymous company, a company that promised to preserve the character of the neighborhood, not bulldoze it for McMansons. Over the next 18 months, a quiet, Invisible transfer of power took place on Hawthorne Street. House by house, deed by deed, Willow Creek Holdings took ownership. The residents didn't change. The street didn't look any different. But beneath the surface, an empire was being built. And soon, Willow Creek Holdings, my company, owned 14 of the 16 houses on the block. The only two I didn't own were Mrs. Gable's, which she wanted to keep in her name for now, and my parents' house. Or so I thought. I was, on paper, a multi-millionaire. My life, however, hadn't changed much on the surface. I had finally quit the coffee shop, but I worked longer hours than ever, managing my growing portfolio from a small, rented office space downtown. I had a nicer apartment now, but it was still modest. I had no interest in the flashy cars or designer clothes my family valued so much. My wealth wasn't for showing off, it was for building, it was my armor. One morning, as I was sorting through emails, one popped up that made my stomach clench. The sender was my mother, Eleanor Thorne. The subject line read, "Family News." I hesitated for a moment before clicking it open. The email was written in her signature style, sickeningly sweet and dripping with condescension. It was a digital invitation, decorated with clip art champagne glasses and balloons. "Dearest Arya," it began. "We are so thrilled to be hosting the annual Hawthorne Street Block Party in our front yard this year. It's such a wonderful tradition. Lachlan will be bringing his new fiancée, Veronica, for everyone to meet. She is just a darling girl, from a wonderful family. We are so hoping to get a full family photo, so of course it wouldn't be complete without you. It would be so lovely for you to come. Who knows, maybe seeing a real, stable community filled with successful people will inspire you to settle down a bit." Every word was a carefully crafted needle, designed to prick at my old insecurities. Lachlan's new fiancé. A full family photo. A stable community. Inspire you. They weren't me. They were summoning the family failure to serve as a backdrop for their perfect, successful lives. The old sting, the familiar feeling of being the odd one out, returned for a moment. My first instinct was to delete the email. To ignore it completely. Why would I willingly walk into the lion's den? But then I thought about it. I wasn't the same person who had fled their house in tears 2 years ago. I sat there, staring at the invitation on my screen, and I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. I read him the email, word for word. He was silent for a long moment on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him thinking. Then, a low chuckle rumbled through the phone, growing into a deep booming laugh. "Oh, that's rich," he said, finally catching his breath. "Arya, you have to go." "Why?" I asked. "Why would I subject myself to that?" "Because you're misunderstanding the invitation," he said, his voice turning serious. "They're not inviting you, the woman who runs Willow Creek Holdings. They're inviting the ghost of the girl they think they broke. The sad little barista living in a tiny apartment. They've built this whole party as a stage to perform their success, and you're supposed to be the audience. But they don't know who owns the theater." His words hit me like a lightning bolt. He was right. They were setting a trap for a person who no longer existed. "You need to go," Marcus continued, his voice firm. "Not for them. You need to go for her. For the girl who cried in the basement over those soggy boxes. Go and stand on that lawn and show her what she built. Remember what I told you. You don't just own a house there anymore. You own the whole damn stage." A slow smile spread across my face. The last bit of fear I felt evaporated, replaced by a steely resolve. This wasn't a trap, it was an opportunity. I opened the email again and clicked the reply button. My response was 5 simple words. "Looking forward to it." Arya. The day of the block party was bright and painfully perfect. The sun shone down on Hawthorne Street, glinting off the polished cars and manicured lawns. The street was closed to traffic, and it was filled with neighbors mingling, kids running around, and the smell of barbecue smoke. My parents' front yard had been transformed into an ostentatious display of their self-perceived importance. White tents had been set up, a catered buffet lined one side of the lawn, and a small, makeshift stage stood near the porch, complete with a microphone. I arrived deliberately late, walking down the center of the street. I had chosen my outfit carefully, not a power suit or a flashy dress, but a simple, beautifully tailored linen dress in a soft cream color. It was elegant, understated, and screamed quiet confidence. My calm demeanor as I walked onto the lawn seemed to throw them off immediately. They had been expecting the nervous, awkward girl from 2 years ago. They didn't know what to do with this version of me. My mother was the first to approach, her smile stretched tight across her face. "Arya, you came, and what a simple little dress." She managed to make it sound like both a compliment and an insult. Lachlan appeared beside her, his arm draped possessively around a woman with sharp features and the same hungry, judgmental eyes as my mother. "Arya, this is my fiancée, Veronica," he said, his voice booming with pride. "Veronica, this is my little sister. She's the artistic one in the family." Veronica gave me a limp handshake and a dismissive up-and-down glance that told me everything I needed to know about her. My father clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to seem affectionate, but felt more like he was checking for structural integrity. "Glad you could make it out of your little apartment, kiddo," he said, his voice loud enough for the nearby neighbors to hear. "It's good to get some fresh air." I just smiled serenely. "It's a lovely party, Dad. You've really gone all out." My composure was clearly unnerving them. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to be sullen or intimidated or defensive. I gave them nothing. Across the street, sitting on her porch with a tall glass of iced tea, I saw Mrs. Gable. She had been watching my arrival. When our eyes met, she gave me a slow, almost imperceptible nod, a tiny secret shared between the two of us. Not far away, I saw my Uncle Gene standing by the buffet table. He looked thinner, more tired than I remembered. He caught my eye and gave me a weak, apologetic smile before quickly looking away. He was still a prisoner. The main event, of course, was my father's speech. He stepped up onto the small stage, tapped the microphone, and beamed at the assembled crowd of neighbors. He grandstanded for 10 minutes about the importance of community, pride of ownership, and maintaining property values. He sounded like a parody of a suburban patriarch. Then he leaned into the microphone, his expression turning serious. The planned humiliation was about to begin. "In fact," he announced, his voice filled with phony gravitas, "that's why a few of us have been talking. We've decided it's time to form an official Hawthorne Street Homeowners Association. To protect the integrity of this street, to uphold our standards." He paused for dramatic effect, and his eyes found mine in the crowd. "To keep out undesirable elements and ensure that only the right kind of people live here." The message was crystal clear. It was aimed directly at me, the renter, the failure, the undesirable element in his perfect family portrait. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably. They knew my family's dynamics. They knew who he was talking about. I stood perfectly still, my expression placid. Just as the neighbors began to murmur amongst themselves, a man in a crisp, dark gray suit walked calmly onto the lawn. He was not dressed for a block party. He moved with a quiet purpose, Lodel cutting through the crowd, his eyes scanning for someone. He headed straight for me. My father faltered on the stage, annoyed at the interruption. The man stopped in front of me, ignoring everyone else. "Miss Thorne," he said, his voice professional and clear, easily audible in the sudden lull. "David Chin, my apologies for the interruption. I'm the portfolio manager for Willow Creek Holdings. We just needed your signature on the final deed transfer paperwork." The world seemed to slow down. A collective, confused silence fell over the lawn. My family froze in a tableau of shock. My father, on the stage, blinked rapidly, his mouth slightly ajar. "Willow Creek," he repeated into the microphone, his voice betraying his confusion. Who in the world is Willow Creek Holdings? David Chen, my brilliant, perfectly rehearsed portfolio manager, turned to face my father. He held up the leather-bound file he was carrying. "Sir," he said, his voice projecting across the silent lawn with the calm authority of a man who holds all the cards. "While Willow Creek Holdings certainly appreciates your civic spirit, any new homeowners association would require the approval of the block's primary property owner." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And for Hawthorne Street, that would be Ms. Aria Thorne." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. It was a physical sound, a wave of pure shock. Lachlan's jaw literally dropped, his smug expression melting into slack-jawed disbelief. My mother's face, which had been beaming with pride just moments before, crumpled. She turned a sickly pale color, her hand flying to her mouth. Veronica, the fiancée, looked back and forth between Lachlan and me, her face a mask of utter confusion. David Chen, ever the professional, opened the file. "Willow Creek Holdings, of which Miss Thorne is the founder and sole owner," he announced, his voice cutting through the stunned silence, "now holds the deeds to 14 properties on this block." He began to list them by address, his tone neutral and factual. "Number 12, number 14, number 17. The list went on and on. With each address, the color drained further from my father's face. But David saved the best for last. He paused, looking directly at my father. "And as of 3 months ago, this one, number 24. He pointed directly at the ground beneath my Vader's feet. He didn't have to explain the rest, but he did, for everyone to hear. "Your second mortgage was in default, sir. The bank foreclosed. Willow Creek Holdings purchased the property from them in an all-cash deal." He let that hang in the air for a moment. "I believe you've been making your rent payments to a bank-managed account for the last 2 months. Those funds have now been successfully rerouted to the new owner." The final brutal twist was laid bare for the entire neighborhood to witness. My father's grandstanding about ownership, his pride, his position as the king of Hawthorne Street. It was all a lie. He was a fraud. He was a renter. And his landlord was me. Richard Thorne turned a ghastly shade of white. He looked like he was going to be sick right there on his little stage. He swayed, grabbing the microphone stand for support. Lachlan was speechless, his face a kaleidoscope of shock, humiliation and dawning horror. My mother let out a small, strangled whimper and grabbed Lachlan's arm, her knuckles white. And in that moment of beautiful, perfect chaos, I saw the reactions that truly mattered. Across the street, Mrs. Gable slowly, deliberately raised her glass of iced tea in a silent, triumphant toast. A wide, genuine smile spread across her face, and my Uncle Jean, who had been frozen by the buffet table, let out a long, shaky breath. It was the sound of a cage door springing open. A smile of pure, unadulterated liberation bloomed on his face. He finally stood up straight. I let the silence stretch for a few more seconds, savoring it. Then I took a step forward. My eyes locked on my father's. I kept my voice low, for him alone, but in the dead quiet, everyone heard it. "You were right, Dad," I said softly. "It is important to own your space." I paused, letting the words twist the knife. "I'll have my manager send over the new rental agreement tomorrow. It will be month to month." I looked over at my mother and brother, their faces ashen. "Don't be late with the payment." Then I turned, gave a small polite nod to David, and walked away. I didn't look back. I just walked off the lawn that was no longer theirs, leaving them speechless and shattered in the wreckage of their own party. The final scene isn't one of confrontation or drama. It's quiet. It's 3 months later, and I'm sitting at an outdoor cafe with Marcus. The sun is warm on my face. Between us on the table aren't ledgers or rental agreements, but a fresh set of blueprints. We're looking them over, but this time, they're for a new project, a small, beautifully designed complex of affordable housing units to be built on a vacant lot I acquired near the old strip mall. The project was inspired by Maria, my first tenant, and the dozens of other good people I'd met who were just looking for a safe, stable place to call home. Marcus is beaming, a proud, crinkly smile that reaches his eyes. He's more animated than I've ever seen him. He points to a detail on the plans, suggesting a way to create a shared green space for the kids. He found his redemption not just in my success, but in my purpose. I tell him what happened after the block party. The fallout was quiet but total. My lawyer sent the lease agreement. They signed it. Their pride was shattered, but apparently not enough to make them pack their bags and face the reality of their finances. Lachlan's fiancée, Veronica, left him a week later. She hadn't signed up to marry the son of a renter. My father is now a ghost in his own rented home, the bluster and authority gone, replaced by a hollow, defeated silence. My mother just cries a lot. They are still my family, biologically, but they hold no power over me. The interesting thing is, the feeling of revenge, that hot, burning core that drove me for so long, has faded. It's been replaced by something much better: peace. My victory wasn't in their destruction, but in my own creation. I didn't just want to tear them down. I wanted to build something better in its place. I also helped Uncle Gene. I gave him a small business loan, at a very favorable interest rate, to open his own custom woodworking shop. He's finally free from my father's financial thumb, and he's happier than I've ever seen him. He sends me pictures of his first commissions, his hands covered in sawdust, his smile wide and genuine. Sometimes, when I drive down Hawthorne Street to check on the properties, I see Mrs. Gable on her porch. She always waves, calling me her favorite landlord, and occasionally leaves a container of her famous oatmeal-raising cookies on my doorstep. I built my foundation not on their ruin, but on my own resilience. It's a foundation made of something stronger than brick and mortar. It's made of self-worth. I am no longer the ghost in someone else's house. I am no longer erased. I am the one holding the pen, and I am writing my own future. The story I told you isn't just about buying houses, it's about reclaiming your worth when someone tries to steal it. The ultimate victory isn't making others feel small, it's about building yourself up so tall that their judgment can't touch you anymore. So let me ask you, have you ever had to prove someone wrong in a big way? What does building your own foundation mean to you? Let me know your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And if my journey resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming the odds. Thanks for listening.